A U.S. Olympic athlete turns her back at the national anthem as she accepts the bronze medal in the hammer throwing competition. Just the latest leftist to show outright disdain for America. Ahead, we take a look at the fashionable mental illness of hating America on tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. So this is one of those moments where you say, why would anyone do that? What is the point? What is the purpose? And we will break that down for you now. Gwen Berry was the bronze medalist in some qualifying before the Tokyo Olympics here. And she in the hammer throw, which I have to tell you is not an event that's particularly well attended or even well known. And while she was getting her bronze medal, she heard the U.S. national anthem, and she was you can see here, very displeased, made a whole thing of it, turned her back on the national anthem, didn't want to be hearing it. And here's what she said. I mean, just to be very clear, it was political. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't something that just occurred. She wanted everyone to know that she was snubbing the anthem. I'm here to represent, she said, those who died due to systemic racism. That's the important part. That's why I'm going. That's why I'm here today. I don't really want to talk about the anthem because that's not important. The anthem doesn't speak for me. It never has. It's not exactly the stuff that you would expect to hear from an Olympian. I mean, somebody who's actually going to be competing in the Olympics, representing the United States, not even just at a professional level for some league, but actually competing as an American on behalf of the United States of America. And yet that was the attitude on display, and it continued afterwards. Now, you might be wondering, what does our oh-so-patriotic Biden administration think of this? Joe Biden, no doubt shuffling around somewhere muttering nonsense, has not actually said anything publicly about this, but his spokesperson in the White House, Press Secretary Jen Psaki, did address this, and here's what she said.
But this weekend, Gwen Berry, who hopes to represent the United States as an Olympian on the hammer throwing events, won a bronze medal at the trials, and then she turned her back on the flag while the anthem played. Does President Biden think that is appropriate behavior for someone who hopes to represent Team USA?
Well, Peter, I haven't spoken to the president specifically about this, but I know he's incredibly proud to be an American and has great respect for the anthem and all that it represents, especially for our men and women serving in uniform all around the world. He would also say, of course, that part of that pride in our country means recognizing there are moments where we are, as a country, haven't lived up to our highest ideals, and it means respecting the right of people granted to them in the Constitution to peacefully protest.
Yeah, that's right. On the one hand, on the other hand, from this White House. Sure, yeah, no, we love the flag and patriotism, but we also are totally okay with this. We're not going to condemn this act. We're not going to say that we don't think it reflects our values. No, let's just pretend like somehow this is normal. Why would Gwen Berry do this? In some ways, that may be the most important thing we can understand here, because there's a part of me that thinks that I shouldn't even be talking about this right now on this show. Why give more oxygen to this story? Why give it more focus and attention? Well, it's because she's doing it knowing that she will actually benefit from this. She's not a martyr. She's not going to suffer. If anything, now because she's embraced the cause of social justice, it's very likely that she will continue to be a celebrity after this. She may well be invited to be a public speaker, a very well-paid public speaker on issues of social justice and activism. She'll probably get a book deal. Who knows? Maybe even a TV gig somewhere. Who knows? But that's the nature of the system today. If you take a stand in favor of social justice and left-wing activism, particularly at the expense of patriotism, the American flag, the national anthem, you're likely to advance your career. You're likely to actually get ahead, to make more money, to be more famous. How did this happen? How did we all of a sudden find ourselves, it seems, in a country where the thing to do is to thumb your nose at the American people and at the flag that represents them because it's going to get you ahead? That's the question we have to continue to focus on and look at, because it has become fashionable on the left to show disdain for America, to fixate on the racism of America's past and present, to exaggerate the racism that still exists in American society, and force everyone to live in this constant battle over intersectionality and critical race theory, to exacerbate all the divisions among us instead of focusing in on what unites us as Americans, having shared celebrations not only of parts of our history that deserve celebration. There's certainly parts that deserve people to look at and say that we did fall short, but there's plenty of that going on. And then beyond that, what can we be united about going forward? And if you're thinking, oh, Buck, this is just one instance, we know it's not. There's, of course, Colin Kaepernick and the kneeling at NBA games and NFL games, and professional sports have taken up this kind of activism. And most of the people who are at the forefront of it have been largely benefiting from it. I mean, they've actually gotten more as a result of this, and they have not actually paid any kind of price. But the Rotunda, the National Archives Task Force has decided that the National Archives Rotunda itself is kind of racist. I mean, just to give you a sense of the country we're living in right now and the things that we get to focus on, the report categorized the National Archives Rotunda as another example of structural racism, as it allows wealthy men, white men, in the nation's founding while marginalizing BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, women, and other communities. The task force suggests ways to reimagine the Rotunda, including staging, dance, or performance art in the space that invites dialogue about the ways the United States has mythologized the founding era. I mean, everything in America now is being turned into a left-wing interpretive dance seminar, basically. Like, everything has to be about artistic opening of expression after we've all agreed that we have to condemn whatever came before us, to condemn different aspects of our shared heritage and history as Americans. And there's nothing that is too small. There's no slight that can be overlooked in this framework of constant racial grievance, which is central to all of this. Oh, and it's also in the military. You may have seen there was a lot of attention paid to General Milley last week when he said this about critical race theory. Play.
On the issue of critical race theory, et cetera, I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand, and I want to understand white rage, and I'm white. And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there.
They are woke. That's the whole point. And remember what I said about Gwen Berry and how she benefits from this? This general probably just got himself a board seat at Raytheon or some other company, probably a better book deal than he would have otherwise. You go woke, you don't go broke, in fact. That's the problem. That's what has to change. People benefit from this. It's tearing this country's culture apart. All right, we'll have more on this topic a little later in the program with the first T on a low. But in just a moment, Republican Glenn Youngkin is running neck and neck with Democrat Terry McAuliffe in the Virginia governor's race. The businessman turned politician joins us next to discuss the race and his fight against critical race theory. If you're anything like me, you have to start your day with a healthy dose of caffeine, and that means kicking off my morning routine with Black Rifle Coffee. Not only is it some of the best coffee I've ever tasted, it's a veteran-owned company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. Black Rifle Coffee is continually committed to supporting veteran law enforcement and first responder causes. This summer, we invite you to enjoy your coffee. And by that, we don't just mean the great taste of America's coffee, but more the places you drink it, the passion and adventure it fuels and inspires, and the entertainment we serve along the way. Whether you're brewing the perfect cup of pour-over before kicking ass at work or cracking a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee Company is here to fuel your way wherever the summer takes you. We import our high-quality coffee beans from all over the world and roast 5 days a week at facilities in Manchester, Tennessee and Salt Lake City, Utah. The team at Black Rifle Coffee is continually researching and experimenting with new roasting methods and coffee origins. Purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/buck and use code BUCK at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee, Black Rifle Coffee. The race for Virginia's governorship is a virtual dead heat. According to the latest poll, Democrat Terry McAuliffe has a 4-point lead over Republican Glenn Youngkin, a result that is within the poll's margin of error. Surprisingly, one of the major issues that has emerged in the contest is the teaching of critical race theory in Virginia's public schools. Republican Glenn Youngkin has promised that if elected, CRT would be prohibited from being taught in Virginia's schools. He joins us now. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you for having me. And you've just touched on one of the big issues that is really at top of mind for so many Virginia voters, not just Republicans, but independents and Democrats too. Families and teachers are up in arms, and what's being taught to our kids in schools is top of the list.
Now, you are up against somebody who's well known in political circles on the other side, Democrat Terry McAuliffe. Wanted to show you what he says about critical race theory and have you react to your opponent here.
So I, listening to what you're saying about education, I was just wondering, with all the Republicans are talking about critical race theory, and they're making this huge deal about it, and it's all the conversation in the news of Virginia. What are you going to say to all those people making education about that?
That's another right-wing conspiracy.
Okay.
This is totally made up by Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin. This is who they are. It's a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
CRT is a conspiracy theory, your opponent says.
Yeah, I just think this is consistent with one true fact, that the truth never got in the way of anything Terry McAuliffe has ever said. I mean, there's invoices in the Loudoun County schools about the coaches and trainers that they brought in to teach critical race theory to their faculty. And this is something that is just representative of a guy who's so out of touch with what's happening in our education system. But oh, by the way, this is also a guy that didn't even show up to meet with the largest police association last week to talk about safe communities either. Terry doesn't want to talk about any of the issues that are most important to Virginians because he knows he's on the wrong side of all of them.
What would you do specifically as governor of Virginia to deal with the issue of critical race theory? We'll get to law enforcement and safety in a moment, but on critical race theory, what kind of order or what kind of legislation would you sign?
Well, Buck, I think right out of the box, we actually get to change the state superintendent of schools, and we get to appoint a secretary of education to understand what it means to have curriculum in schools that prepares our kids to, in fact, compete, as opposed to teaching them some sort of political agenda. And then second of all, the interpretation of an expectation that we can talk about racial differences and how we bring people together resulted in teaching critical race theory. And let's just step back and make sure that we, in fact, are talking about the most important issue when it comes to race, which is how do we come together? And in fact, how do we have opportunities for all Virginians? We have equal opportunities as opposed to mandating equal outcomes. And in fact, this completely misguided approach has resulted also in our current State Board of Education deciding that they're going to investigate not teaching accelerated math in schools or not awarding advanced diplomas, even though the children have done the work. I mean, we have got to recognize that the goal of our schools is to allow our children to run as fast as they can and not to bring them into the slow lane. And I think this just all represents a terribly misguided academic curriculum approach that the Terry McAuliffe, Ralph Northam administrations have been pushing for 8 years.
What do you think of Governor DeSantis's anti-totalitarian ideology curriculum idea that just got some play recently? Would you want to see something like that? If we're going to talk about teaching important parts of history, Governor DeSantis wants the school-age children in the state of Florida to learn about the horrors of communism and Marxism, radical socialism. What do you think?
Yeah, I think this makes great sense. I think the key for us is to make sure that we are teaching real history, both the good and the bad, to all of our children. And I think America's children and Virginia's kids need to understand that many of these alternative government experiments, predominantly totalitarianism and communism, have failed. And so we've got a real opportunity now to think about curriculum, but I just want to go back. I want to make sure that we are focused on preparing our kids to, in fact, be career ready or college ready when they come out of school. And in fact, teaching them a political agenda as opposed to those most important capabilities that they need to know, reading, writing, arithmetic, in order to be prepared to compete in an ever-increasing competitive world is where, when I'm governor, and people will actually say it again, I'm going to be the governor of educational excellence. Virginia is going to redirect the focus of our schools away from critical race theory and on real academic curriculum.
Taking us now to the issue of public safety and law enforcement. If you can just give everyone a sense, it's obviously different in every city, every state across the country, but the overall trend is very clear in major U.S. cities for shootings and for homicides going up substantially over the last 12 months. What is the law enforcement picture like right now in Virginia? And what would you do that's different from, say, what Democrat Terry McAuliffe would do?
Well, unfortunately, Virginia is in a shocking state right now when it comes to law enforcement. We have a 20-year high in murder rate, and we, in fact, are watching violent crimes increase across the Commonwealth. And sadly and unacceptably, what we've seen is that our leaders in Richmond have so fundamentally mismanaged the law enforcement policies that have come out that we've made it harder for law enforcement to do their jobs. I mean, most importantly, we've watched them systematically try to defund them. We've watched them demean them. And oh, by the way, as a result, what we've seen is a complete lack of support. So today we have a high rate of retirements and resignations. We have a lower rate of enrollments, and as a result, we see depleted capabilities. And even worse, just last week, when we were invited by the largest police association to come speak with them, I, along with Winsome Sears, our lieutenant governor, and Jason Miyares, our attorney general candidate, all attended a very long briefing from the association representing nearly 7,000 law enforcement heroes. And Terry McAuliffe and his colleagues didn't even show up. They absolutely made an incredibly clear message to all of our law enforcement heroes and our communities that they don't care about them. And this is the position that he's taking. I think lastly, and most importantly, what we're seeing is Republicans stand up for law enforcement, and the left, liberal progressives absolutely clearly communicate that law enforcement's not important to them. And this is a clear distinction as we head to the polls this autumn. Finally, Terry McAuliffe has said that he would, in fact, get rid of qualified immunity. And qualified immunity is a very important legal protection against frivolous lawsuits being placed against our law enforcement heroes. And I will protect qualified immunity at all counts to make sure that our law enforcement heroes know that I've got their back.
Glenn, good luck to you. Thanks again for coming on. We'll talk to you soon. Going to be a big election.
I greatly appreciate you having me. It's an important election for Virginia. We're absolutely going to get our great Commonwealth back and send a shockwave through the system that we, in fact, in Virginia, are going to elect a Republican governor.
We're hoping. See you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye.
Up next, we have more on the U.S. Olympic athlete who turned her back on the national anthem with the First TV's Tiana Lowe. Stay with us. I've been telling you for a while now about online thieves who can easily steal your home's title. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take it from this thief who stole over 150 homes and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is why you need Home Title Lock. Heard enough? Don't let this crime happen to you. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim and enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection.
Nobody thinks that I can take their house and borrow against the house. No, I have title insurance for that. No, it's in my name, or he would have to get some special document. They would call me. Nobody's calling you. After I've stolen the title, borrowed against it, or sold the property, or done whatever I've done with it, it's 60 to 90 days to even figure out that they're the victim of this crime. By that point, you start getting foreclosure notices and you realize you've got 4 mortgages on your house. Not only that, you don't even own your home anymore. It's not even in your name.
That's Code Radio at HomeTitleLock.com. Over the weekend, U.S. Olympic hammer thrower Gwen Berry turned her back on the American flag during a medal ceremony at the U.S. track and field trials after winning bronze. It's kind of a Colin Kaepernick copycat situation. Turned away during the national anthem and draped herself with an activist athlete T-shirt saying she's representing those killed by systemic racism. Here to react, contributor here to the First TV and at the Washington Examiner, Tina Lowe. Tina, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
All right, so first, here is a statement from Berry. She put this out, quote, "They said they were going to play it before we walked out. Then they played it when we were out there. But I don't really want to talk about the anthem because that's not important. The anthem doesn't speak for me. It never has." End quote. Some are saying, including Dan Crenshaw, Congressman of Texas, Tina, that maybe this is not the right person to represent the United States at the Olympics.
Yeah, the Olympics have always been a diplomatic opportunity. There is a reason why every country is celebrating their own flags. And it's the reason why they created a refugee team 4 years, or I guess now it's 5 years ago, to represent pride in your patriotism. I do sort of appreciate the arrogance involved in being third place in an event and claiming that the anthem is being played for you as though you have any say in the matter rather than the person who's coming in first. But it's just this sort of athlete hypocrisy where they understand, just like Kaepernick managed to revive his career by becoming a millionaire by equating the cops with pigs and praising Che Guevara, all you have to do is show a little disrespect for the flag, show a little disrespect for the country, and boom, you'll get some sort of sponsorship deal from these woke corporations.
Any surprise from you that the White House put out the statement, or rather Jen Psaki made the statement she did, saying essentially, oh no, we totally respect patriotism, but we also respect this person's non-patriotism?
Yeah, the First Amendment isn't freedom from consequences. And again, this isn't even a private corporation in the same sense, that the NBA or the NFL is. We go through diplomatic formal channels in sending over our Olympic teams. You are representing the USA. There is a reason why we're debating pulling out of the China Olympics in a year from now, because these things are fraught with diplomacy. And so if that's how you want to represent your country, throwing a public tantrum, while again, you're in third place claiming that the anthem is being played for you, honestly, you should take that attitude elsewhere. I don't know what the White House can do when it comes to individual athletes, and I don't know what they should do, but she could have given a statement a lot less mealy-mouthed than that.
Do we have any sense as to whether the Olympic Committee, the American Olympic Committee, whatever it's technically called, is going to try to establish some guidelines? Because it seems like right now you've got Gwen Berry. I mean, we're talking about her. She's one of the biggest stories in America today. Kind of a slow news day, I guess. So that's why this is getting as much attention as it is. But it is a top news story in a lot of major sites, and people are obviously bothered by what happened. And just wondering what happens if other athletes see this and say, I'm somebody that's on the, I don't know what the most obscure Summer Olympics, certainly this would be one of them. But if you're on a more obscure event and you want to become famous, all you have to do is take a knee during the anthem and the whole country's going to talk about you. It seems almost like this is going to get formulaic.
Probably, and quite frankly, it will make us look very weak to other countries. There is a reason why, if you remember from the Winter Olympics, I guess it was 3 years ago, why it made so many headlines that Mike Pence wouldn't look at Kim Jong-un's sister. Because it is important that when we represent ourselves, we grant legitimacy to our democratic allies, and we do not recognize our adversaries. It is important that we send our best. And I don't think that in this case, this is sending our best. And as you said, this is the fastest way to platform yourself. I guarantee you that this woman was not getting tons of endorsements or sponsorships before this, but now Nike's going to call her up immediately.
Well, I do think that if this happens, and if it plays out the way you and I both seem to think it very well might, it'll start to show how shallow this is. I mean, you know, Colin Kaepernick is not actually has not actually done anything to help oppressed communities, or, you know, this is not a guy who's a political leader or even a community organizer in any meaningful sense. He's a guy now with a big shoe endorsement deal, and he's got his picture on the cover of of magazines, and I think he might have even been on the Wheaties box. But you know, that's what's ended up happening. It's all for him. And if people start seeing this for what it is, I feel like eventually it'll just become too clear how shallow this is and how it's performative. It's virtue signaling with dollars attached to it.
Yes, and with regards to Nike in particular, you know, they can say Black and brown lives matter. We have Colin Kaepernick as a spokesman. Look how woke we are. But over the weekend, Nike said that it is a company for and by China. So if you are lobbying Congress to keep relaxed trade, so that way companies like Nike and companies like Apple can continue to use Uyghur slave labor, you know, the majority of whom are brown Muslims, it's pretty transparent that Colin Kaepernick is just a marketing technique, that this is not about human rights, but rather performative wokeness.
And is there also now a greater possibility, or perhaps even just more scrutiny, on whether some U.S. athletes will make statements, for example, that call out China? I mean, could you imagine what the international outcry would be if an American athlete did something during the Chinese national anthem? But it feels like these days, even criticizing what's going on in China is something that some of the most famous and wealthy athletes in the world, in this country, here in America, won't go near.
Oh, it's preposterous and it's shameful. You know, America has its problems. No one is denying that. But kneeling for an anthem with just touting a shirt that says, you know, I'm an activist against injustice or inequity or some vague thing, you aren't changing anything by disrespecting the anthem. You're not lobbying Congress to change a bill. But there's not really any blowback when these athletes are sycophantic to China. We already saw LeBron basically saying, oh, Daryl Morey just isn't educated or doesn't know about what's really going on in China. Because at the end of the day, China makes them rich and all they care about is the bottom dollar. It's all a farce. None of these athletes actually care about how much Black lives do matter. They would trade them away in a second if it meant they could profit more off of them.
Tina Lowe, good to see you, Tina. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
President Biden ordered airstrikes against an Iran-backed militia group near the Iraq-Syria border yesterday. After the break, former Chief of Staff to the acting Secretary of Defense, Kash Patel, joins us to give his thoughts on Biden's provocative move. Yesterday, President Biden ordered airstrikes against Iranian-backed militia groups. U.S. fighter jets hit 3 target facilities near the Iraq-Syria border region in response to attacks against American troops in Iraq. Here was Secretary of State Anthony Blinken earlier today.
We have been very clear, the President has been very clear throughout, that we will act to protect U.S. personnel. And given these ongoing attacks that you referred to by Iran-backed groups targeting our interests in Iraq, he directed further military action, we've taken action previously, to disrupt and deter these attacks.
Joining me now to discuss, former Chief of Staff to the acting Secretary of Defense in the Trump administration, Kash Patel. Kash, good to see you.
Buck, thanks so much for having me.
First, what was this all about? Why is Biden ordering missile strikes against some group backed by Iran on the Iraq-Syria border?
Well, so hopefully these are intelligence-driven strikes, as you're very familiar with, and as I was when I ran counterterrorism for President Trump at the White House. And look, what they call Shia militia groups, SMGs, or variation in the PMC world. Basically, those are all terrorist organizations and designated as such by the United States of America because they've met the evidence and intelligence threshold to classify them as posing significant interest to U.S. personnel manning in the United States national security. So I hope, and I agree with the administration on this one, that if they were done to protect American interests and American military men and women, then I'm all for it, because that's what the intelligence community is for, to make these decisions.
What are these Iranian-backed groups doing? What's their goal in the region? What are they trying to accomplish?
So that's a great question. So basically, unfortunately, Iran has become, the reason they are the #1 state sponsor of terrorism is because they have mastered the art of allowing people outside of Iran, groups outside of Iran, to fight on their behalf against American interests. So just think of a force of soldiers or trained military professionals that are being paid, basically mercenaries, by the Iranian government, who share a hatred for the United States of America, and they get to basically expend this manning and energy and military action against U.S. interests from places like Iraq and Syria. And they do this so they think that the world won't know there's a direct connection to Iran. But obviously we, the United States, knows and has intelligence to support it, which is public now because of the designations we've made, that these groups are specifically paid by the Iranian regime and Qasem Soleimani, well, he's dead now, but the Quds Force and others to attack American interests.
And how is the situation right now? I mean, the Biden administration obviously has fired off some missiles here, so it's getting some attention. U.S. troop presence in the Iraq Syria region, the stability of the area. How are things going over there? We don't hear. There's not very much reporting on it.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I remember when we took airstrikes during the President Trump administration for the same purpose. I looked at all the mainstream media today. This strike is buried in their headlines. When we did it to protect the American public, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats were screaming from Congress that we didn't, quote unquote, consult them and get their permission. But that's not the role of the United States Congress. The executive branch makes determinations to protect the sovereign interest of the U.S. based on intelligence. And the mainstream media should be treating this situation exactly the same as it treated us when President Trump was ordering these strikes, because this is one instance where we can all agree that if we're taking these strikes in the national security interest of America, then we should continue doing so. But the sort of hypocrisy in reporting and the double standard further buries this national security interest because it was taken by Joe Biden and the media doesn't want to go after him.
What is the Biden administration policy when it comes to Syria and Iran? Do we really have a sense yet? I mean, I know it's early still, but in terms of their approach, their goals, do we know what they're trying to do?
No, and that's another great question. And I've been asking, and as you've been asking it, Buck, what is the United States national foreign policy against the world's state sponsor of terrorism in Iran and places like Syria and Iraq and their paramilitary groups, the SMGs? And they have not publicly stated any national foreign policy against those terrorist nations and those willing to do us harm. And that's rather unfortunate because they've expended their energy sending the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to go to the Hill and talk about white rage and white supremacy and phantom targets within the United States that hurt American national security interests. I would love Secretary Blinken and the National Security Advisor to go up on stage together and say jointly, we will come after any terrorist nation that attacks the U.S. And also, here is our policy against Iran, but they're probably too busy, my suspicion is, trying to get these strikes in before they rejoin the JCPOA and end up paying for more attacks on America like we did under Obama.
You mentioned General Milley and his statements recently. They got a lot of attention just a few days ago about wokeness in the military. How much of an issue? I mean, you were the chief of staff, the acting Secretary of Defense. Was this something that was coming across your radar, and were there efforts under the Trump administration to try to address the fact that there's some level of indoctrination? I mean, Milley said he wants to learn more about white rage, to which a lot of people said, what?
Yeah, that's kind of my reaction. First of all, I served with Chairman Milley when I ran the Department of Defense. And I also served in the Department of Defense under President Obama as a minority. Not once in my multiple tours overseas and 16 years of service did I ever experience any racism directed at me or ever hear about it. And when I led the Department of Defense, our priorities were driven by intelligence. And if we had the domestic terrorism intelligence to support that white supremacy was an issue within the Department of Defense, we would have acted. But this is the perfect example of the politicization of the national security of the United States of America, and that the mainstream media gets to drive the national security talking points from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the United States Congress is outrageous. Because it didn't just happen overnight and all of a sudden. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Cash, were you surprised at what General Milley said?
No, I wasn't surprised because I think he's just positing for his job. He knows that if he doesn't appease the mainstream media and the headlines, they're going to attack him, which is going to cause Joe Biden to can General Milley. And I think that's unfortunate because he has a decorated military officer who I served with here and overseas. And it's just a shame to see that the mainstream media can have such an impact that it affects the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff actions in the defense of this nation. He wants to understand white rage. Tell him to Google it on his own time because it doesn't exist in the United States military.
Seems very strange to put that on a recommended reading list for members of the military. What's really the purpose of that? But Cash, always appreciate the expertise, man. Good to see you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Buck.
All right, we come back. New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shows just how serious Democrats are about combating violent crime, or not serious they are. We'll have her latest in Quick Hits. Have you ever wanted to invest in real estate, but you didn't want to make big rookie mistakes and you didn't have the time to figure it all out on your own? I felt exactly the same way as you until a little over a year ago. I've always loved the idea of real estate investments, but I didn't want to get involved in something that was going to lead me to make those big early errors. That's when I met my friends at Done For You Real Estate. They took all the guesswork out of it for me. They found me an awesome property. They rented it out for me right away. They managed the tenant for me, and now I get a check every month like clockwork. Don't wait another second to see if my buddies at Done For You Real Estate can do for you what they did for me. Visit doneforyoubuck.com to see how it works. Again, every step of the process, from picking the city, the house, getting the loan set up, getting a tenant in place, and a management company to handle the whole thing for you. Just go to doneforyoubuck.com to see what my friends can do for you. Doneforyoubuck.com to begin your real estate investment journey. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dismisses concerns about the rise in violent crime, and the Make-A-Wish Foundation announces it won't grant wishes to terminally ill children who aren't vaccinated. And they had to update that policy, by the way. Those stories on Quick Hits. Let's get right to it. First of all, AOC. You will often hear that she is from the Bronx. She is, in fact, from Westchester, which is a wealthy suburb of New York. But nonetheless, AOC wants you to know that the almost 50% increase in homicides in New York City year over year, and the enormous increases in shootings and homicides all across the country the last 12 months are nothing to get too excited, upset, anxious about. Here she is saying that, oh yeah, all that crime wave stuff, it's just hysteria.
We are seeing these headlines about percentage increases. Now, I want to say that any amount of harm is unacceptable and too much, but I also want to make sure that this hysteria, that this doesn't drive a hysteria, and that we look at these numbers in context so that we can make responsible decisions about what to allocate in that context.
The worst increase in the murder rate in almost 20 years. Is that something to get upset about? I think it is. So where's the hysteria exactly? All the numbers show that more people are being shot, more people are dying. A lot more in the last 12 months. So that's not something that we should, let's get really upset about climate change and how it's such an existential threat. Let's all have a big weeping session about that instead. It's absurd. Absolutely absurd. But this is what the left believes now. They'll have to come up with all kinds of ways to divert and to try to distract from the fact that things have gotten much less safe in America's cities because of the defund the police movement, because of the BLM riots and protests that we saw last summer, what that did to the political climate, and what that has done to law enforcement nationwide. This was from the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You should see it.
Now, we've consulted with doctors and medical professionals throughout the National Medical Advisory Council, and we've been monitoring public health organizations like the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. And based on their collective guidance, today we're making a big step forward in delivering hope to you, our Wish kids, and our Wish families. I'm excited to share that Make-A-Wish will resume granting air travel wishes within the United States and its territories, as well as granting wishes involving large gatherings for vaccinated Wish families as soon as September 15th of 2021. All Wish participants, including your Wish kid and any siblings, will need to be 2 weeks past completion of either a 1-dose or a 2-dose vaccine.
This was madness, right? These are often terminally ill children. They have to get vaccinated or they can't get their wish. Absolutely outrageous. They did reverse this policy after all of the anger and rage that this initially brought about, and understandably so. But just to give you a sense of how intense the mask maniac lockdowners really are, even for terminally ill children, their first impulse is, well, we got to make sure they're vaccinated or else. This was interesting. A Pride organizer, the New York City Pride co-chair, in fact, said something about law enforcement that you should hear.
It shows that he's not really, acknowledging the pain and the hurt and the trauma that the police have caused to members of the Black community, the brown community, and the trans community. It's easy for them to take the uniforms off, to wear a simple polo, something that identifies themselves as a member of the NYPD, but to take off a uniform in many ways is a symbol of oppression. It's a symbol of violence. It's a symbol of fear for many in our community.
Yes, the NYPD uniform is a symbol of violence and oppression, according to this organizer. So that's why they're not allowing NYPD to march in the parade, including an NYPD LGBTQ plus affinity group. So members of that community who happen to be members of the NYPD as well, not allowed to march. And there's also been talk of trying to use much more private security and to limit the presence of the NYPD even as a safety measure at the Pride Parade in New York City. And what is this all pushed by? Exactly what we've been talking about, anti-police madness. The narrative is so much more essential, it seems, to Democrats than the facts, than just being reasonable about any of this. So the outrage here continues on. Then there's Cynthia McKinney, a former Democratic congresswoman. I haven't heard of this person. I don't even know if I've ever heard of this person, to be honest with you. I haven't heard about her in a long time, though, for sure. And she shared this. Former Democrat congresswoman, not anymore in Congress. The final piece of the puzzle, Zionists did it, is what she's putting there with 9/11. Clearly, this person is a loon, and this is just, it's so crazy and stupid as to be really beneath commentary of any kind, but it is worth pointing out that I assure you, if she were a former Republican member of Congress, this would not be the first time that you saw that tweet shared on a news program. You'd be hearing about it a whole lot more. That much is clearly the case. Be sure to check out the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show if you have not already, 12 to 3, 400 plus stations across the country. So that's what I'm up to, 12 to 3 Eastern time. And also download the Buck Sexton podcast, which is available every morning, 11 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to my deep dives into the day's events if you want the audio version. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.